Gulf States Newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm environmental justice reporter Danny McArthur, chopping it up this week. On today's show, the country has had a few run-ins with panic buying over the past several years. We talk about one bathroom staple that you may not need to worry about.
That's probably the worst example because the U.S. is the big producer of paper products. We export toilet paper.
And a majority Black neighborhood in New Orleans worries about an upcoming grain terminal in their community.
We've been, in my opinion, sold down the river a bunch of times. Pardon the pun, because there's no conversation here.
That's all coming up on the Gulf States Gumbo. The dock worker strike that shut down ports along the South and East Coast last month only lasted a few days. But it set off panic buying across the U.S., with shoppers worried store shelves would go empty. Our senior economic mobility reporter, Stephan Bisaha, looks into one panic buying staple people can keep off their shopping list.
Toilet paper is disappearing off the shelves.
That's right, a pandemic deja vu.
Toilet paper shelves empty at some stores because of the port strike.
Shoppers feared the port strike would lead to toilet paper shortages and responded by panic buying.
I understand people are running to buy toilet paper.
That last voice was Mike Lee. He's the head of the shipping logistics company Page & Jones based in Mobile, Alabama. We spoke mid-strike, and he said while shoppers should worry about shortages for some products, toilet paper is not one of them.
That's probably the worst example because the U.S. is the big producer of paper products. We export toilet paper.
Now, we also import toilet paper, but the vast majority of the TP we buy in this country is made domestically. Paper and pulp production is actually big business in southern states like Mississippi and Alabama. In fact, the Port of Mobile exported more than $1.5 billion worth of paper products in 2022.
So while the strike's going on, there's not going to be a shortage. There's going to be a surplus because they can't sell the toilet paper in the rest of the world.
Except there was a shortage, at least at some stores. But it wasn't because of the strike so much as shoppers' overreaction to the strike.
One of the things that tends to happen with panic buying, and this definitely relates to the toilet paper situation, is they create what's called a bullwhip effect.
Glenn Ritchie is the research director at Auburn University's Center for Supply Chain Innovation. And a bullwhip is a pretty good analogy here.
If you think about a bullwhip, you make a small adjustment with your wrist, pop it, and at the end of the whip, there's a major, swap.
The supply chain works the same way. A scared shopper choosing to buy a few extra rolls of double ply is the small flick of the wrist. The snap at the end is then caused by lots of shoppers all thinking the same thing. That leaves stores and suppliers scrambling to meet that demand spike. And it was part of the reason behind the pandemic TP shortages too. But by the time manufacturers ramp up production to meet the demand, well, the crisis may already be over. After all, this port strike lasted just a few days, and that leaves stores with a lot of extra toilet paper on hand.
That's the time to go out and buy cheap toilet paper, probably.
Oh, so we should all be running to the stores right now that there's
Yes.
some toilet paper sales going on?
I don't. There probably always are some toilet paper sales going on, yeah.
Now, the dock worker strike only ended because of a temporary agreement. The ports, shipping companies, and the union have until mid-January to finish negotiating. If they don't, well, those ports may get shut down again. And if that happens, don't worry about toilet paper. Terry Esper researches supply chains at Ohio State. He says instead worry about the perishable goods we do import, because those won't last through a long strike.
We're talking things like fresh fruit, fresh fish.
So instead of running to the paper aisle, you should run to the seafood aisle.
That's definitely something to take into consideration.
Of course, there is another kind of supply chain disruption we become all too familiar with in the South, natural disasters like hurricanes. In the case of a bad storm on the radar, it might be worth picking up a few extra rolls.
Toilet paper, preparation buying is understandable if you have a big family and you don't know how long it's going to be before you'll be able to get your hands on a replenishment. That makes sense.
But Esper says there's a fine line between responsible preparation and irresponsible panic buying. Companies like Walmart actually hire meteorologists to track storms. That way, the companies know where to move pallets of things like toilet paper so they could quickly stock a place back up post-disaster. So Esper's big tip to shoppers?
Buy, don't panic.
As in, buy that toilet paper before the storm, just maybe not a month's worth. Because that's one way to guarantee empty shelves for everyone. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Stephan Bisaha.
The Gulf States Newsroom is a team of journalists working with NPR and local public media stations in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana to cover the issues that matter to you. Email us, connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org.
Earlier this year, environmental activists in Louisiana's Cancer Alley celebrated a big victory. They stopped a major grain elevator project in St. John the Baptist Parish. But now, another community is trying to get a different grain project stopped further down the Mississippi. As Eva Tesfaye with our partner station WWNO reports, this time it's in the majority black neighborhood of the Lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans.
Alabo Street is residential. Children hop off the school bus and wave goodbye to each other across the road, which also means they're waving across the inactive train tracks that go down the street. The tracks meander like a river, in some places running only a few feet from the houses. But these tracks are about to start humming with trains again. That's thanks to a new plan to rehabilitate the nearby Alabo Street Wharf. Jeffrey Wittenbrink is a board member at the local neighborhood association.
The train track is 150 feet away from these two new homes that were just built, and probably 10 or 15 feet away from this home that's right here on the corner as well.
The tracks lead to the wharf, which used to move lumber. Now, the Port of New Orleans has approved a new terminal for organic grain, imported from Eastern Europe. It says the wharf's warehouse space and location make it ideal for this project. But many residents like Wittenbrink are opposed, and they feel like they were never truly consulted in the decision. Those concerns go back to the original meeting for public comment. That was held in June. The Port of New Orleans posted 2 ads in a local paper, but residents say they never saw those ads, and they didn't know about the meeting, so none of them came. And during that same meeting, the port's commissioners greenlit the project. Lindsay Edwards, who lives near the wharf, says it seems to her like the port was planning the project for a long time without telling the residents.
That's a question I want to ask. How long has this been in the works?
The community only found out about the plan months later in September at a local politician's town hall. After that, they organized a community meeting with the port's chief of staff. One resident got up and said there was no way they'd support the terminal.
This is not fair to the Lower Ninth Ward. We don't want it in our neighborhood.
Others said they don't want trains passing down the narrow street. Some brought up pests, others worried about grain dust. Grain dust can be harmful to respiratory health, causing issues such as asthma and chronic bronchitis. The wharf will be leased out to a company called Sunrise Foods International, who did not respond to requests for comment. The rail company Norfolk Southern will reactivate the train tracks. It says only 1 train will go in and out per day. At the meeting, the port's chief of staff, Sarah Porteous, said the companies want to work with the community.
They really do want to be a good neighbor. They are willing and interested in making improvements in the neighborhood.
The port has said Sunrise Foods would do this by contributing financially to a community project. Porteous also said the grain terminal will be safe. She said that dust will be completely contained and managed according to federal workplace standards.
Everything is self-contained, so we're not talking about sort of an open space like you'd see in a grain elevator or silo.
But despite residents' worries, construction on the railroad tracks has already started. Willie Calhoun Jr. is a longtime resident and the Reverend of Fairview Mission Baptist Church. He says this is a part of a history of unwanted industrial development in the Lower Ninth Ward, one of the lower-income neighborhoods in New Orleans. For example, for years the community has been trying to stop the Army Corps' lock replacement project in the Industrial Canal, which could increase flood risk in the neighborhood.
We've been, in my opinion, sold down the river a bunch of times. Pardon the pun, because there's no conversation here.
He also pointed out that the Port of New Orleans is trying to restart train tracks in his community. At the same time, it's trying to remove train tracks from the nearby, whiter, wealthier neighborhood of Bywater.
Who lives in Bywater and who lives in the Lower Nine. So yeah, you got a bias, and it's a racial bias that's there. Again, it's all in the name of making money.
But Calhoun is not entirely opposed to the plan. He just wants the port, Sunrise Foods, and Norfolk Southern to involve the community and to make a plan that benefits the residents as well.
Norfolk Southern, Sunrise Food, and the port needs to come to this community and sit them down and say, this is where we are, this is what's going on. Anything short of that, I believe, is wrong.
But so far, that meeting hasn't happened. So residents say they're going to keep doing everything they can to get their voices heard.
That was Eva Tesfaye from our partner station, WWNO, in New Orleans. And now it's time for Gulf States Gems, a series that shines a light on some of the treasures of the region. This week's gem is from a spot outside Morgantown, Mississippi. And here to tell us about it is community engagement reporter Maya Miller. Hey, Maya.
Hey, Danny. So my gem for this week is Red Bluff. Red Bluff is often referred to as the Grand Canyon of Mississippi, and the old highway that it's formed from caved in decades ago, revealing the most astonishing clay underneath, like deep red, some gold, and even purple in some spots. It's a steep hike down into it, and if you're feeling extra brave, you can trek about a mile through the woods and follow the creek toward the Pearl River. My fave is to just lay out on the sandbar.
Yeah, I went there on a hot day and it was too much for me. But Maya, you stuck it out.
Yeah, I barely made it back up, but the trick is to bring way more water with you than you think.
You can see pictures of Red Bluff and other Gulf States gems from across the region on our Instagram. And we want to hear about a place you consider a gem, a beloved bar, a food spot, or a natural park. Send us your suggestion. Email connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org. And Maya, when you're not hiking the Grand Canyon of Mississippi, you're connecting with communities all over the region. You're working on a new project. Tell us more.
Yeah, so I get all kinds of story ideas from listeners, and I would love to hear from you. I'm working on a project that highlights small town historians who are preserving stories from their communities, but I also want to meet more young folks who hope to create history in their hometowns, whether through environmental justice, civil rights, or voting rights advocacy.
Okay, Gulf States Gumbo listeners. So if you know anyone doing this kind of work in your part of the region, email connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org. And before we go, we've got one more thing to plug. Our reporter Drew Hawkins has a podcast project out in partnership with the LSU Cold Case Project. It's called Bitter Jaguar, and it delves into the tragic shooting of LSU students Denver Smith and Leonard Brown at Southern University in 1972.
More than 50 years later, there are still so many unanswered questions about what happened that day.
I remember, I said, is this real? I remember pinching myself. You know, I took my arm and I pinched myself and I'm like, this is real.
That day is still just very, very vivid in my mind, and I never forgot it.
You can find Bitter Jaguar at WWNO.org. This week's Gulf States Gumbo was produced by me, Danny McArthur. Our head chef this week is Priska Neely. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your root.